The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, we look at the troubled situation in which our post-secondary institutions find themselves. Then, the Minister of Science for Serbia joins us to discuss what she'd like to partner with Canada on. That's all ahead on the agenda. These are difficult times to be a student at one of Ontario's colleges or universities. The provincial government is contributing less and less to the post-secondary system's bottom line. Plus, it's frozen tuition for more than 6 years. And of course, the federal government has cut way back on international student visas, depriving the system of hundreds of millions of dollars it was counting on to keep the lights on. If you've got a kid in post-secondary or are a student there yourself, what are the implications of this perfect storm? Let's ask David Agnew, who's been president of Seneca Polytechnic since 2009. And David, we thank you for coming in today.
My pleasure.
It's good to see you again. Let's just, for those who don't know as much as they should about your post-secondary institution, Sheldon, bring the graphic up if you will, and we'll do some history here. Here's the 411 on Seneca. It was established in 1966. They have campuses in Northeast Toronto, 2 in Northwest Toronto, downtown Toronto, and then north of the city in King City, Markham, and then east of the city in Peterborough. There are 30,000 full-time students and 60,000 annual part-time students with a budget of around $600 million a year. Now, as we say, you've been the head of Seneca for 15 years. Compare what the challenges are like today as to when you started 15 years ago.
Well, a couple things. One is that I joke that the day I joined Seneca back in 2009 was the day that the provincial government stopped giving us funding increases. So until last fall, we went for 15 years without a general increase in our operating grant. Then, about 6 years ago, the provincial government decided to not just freeze, but to cut and then freeze tuition. And so that's been going on for the last few years and promised to go for 3 more years. So financial issues have been a big, big challenge. Now, what's happened, and this is pretty much public record, of course, the relief valve for all of us has been international students.
Yes.
And so that, was kind of, what has happened now is the perfect storm. For us, in many ways, it was kind of the perfect solution. Demographically, we weren't growing more students in Ontario, so the demographics were tough, the funding was tough, but we had international students, and that could help us, in fact, not just help us survive, but cross-subsidize those domestic students. I mean, we lose money teaching domestic students, and that's a terrible thing to say.
Say that again. You lose money teaching students who are made in Ontario.
Absolutely, because the funding formula and the tuition freeze have combined to make it basically uneconomical.
So you were depending on those foreign students in order to keep the lights on.
100%. Now, that's, I can only tell the Seneca story. There were lots of behaviors in the system, and some of them attracted a lot of attention, and some of them weren't so good. And so that, inevitably that led to a kind of a reaction, as every action does. And we're in the pickle that we're in right now because the federal government came in, frankly, with a bit of a sledgehammer on international students.
Did you know that was coming down the pipe?
We didn't know in precise terms, but there had been, the messaging moved very quickly from we've got to do something to we're going to do something, and it's not going to, and it's going to be big. So it, honestly, this issue, again, Steve, you know me, I'll be very blunt, it got very political very fast. And that's, I think, what has been is the story of the last, say, year or so.
Just so I understand that, when you say it got political, you mean the federal government perceived that it had a political problem as it related to foreigners coming here, and therefore they put the brakes on?
Your words are perfect. So I think they saw that there was this kind of conflating of international students, temporary foreign workers, housing costs, rising cost of living. We better deal with and listen, look at the numbers. The federal government had approved a whole bunch of study permits and a whole bunch of temporary foreign workers. I mean, the curve really went up.
Yeah.
I like to remind people, we don't approve study permits. The federal government did, and they did so in great, great numbers. So the pendulum swung, and the pendulum swung way over. And of course, we didn't have just a cap. We had a cut and a cap, and then just recently, more cut to that cap. In the meantime, and we can get into this, because this is our challenge, and this isn't our Seneca challenge, and this isn't just the post-secondary challenge, this is the Canada challenge. Because the announcement, it started on January 22nd with the cut and cap, then was succeeded by a whole bunch of different announcements about postgraduate work permits, spousals, graduate programs, yes, no, have to have, an allocation letter, all sorts of confusing messages, to the point now where in the 150 countries where we recruit students, there's quite a bit of confusion about what Canada wants in international students.
We are going to pursue that, but obviously, one of the things that I've been hearing over and over is that if this situation persists, colleges and universities are either going to have to close campuses, or some may even close down entirely. What has been the Seneca experience in terms of whether you've had to close campuses?
We've temporarily closed our Markham campus, so that's our campus up at Highway 7 and 404. It was our Seneca International Academy. We had 5,000 international students there, taking a whole bunch of programs. Again, we're very proud of the diversity of our international student population. We have made that frankly, since I arrived, we've made that a mainstay of our international strategy. But we've just watched as interest in Canada dries up. Our applications are way down. As others have remarked, we are going to way overachieve on the federal cut to international student numbers collectively, because there's so little interest and so much confusion out there about what Canada wants. The message out there is that we really don't want you to stay.
So what happens to the 5,000 students, and presumably the staff that were teaching those 5,000 students? What happens to them? Well,
so there are fewer than 5,000. So what we've done starting in January is we've moved those students and those programs back to a couple of other bigger campuses that are still thriving. And so the students actually, this was as much done. Obviously it's going to be done for operational efficiencies, but it's also being done for the student experience. It's better to be at a thriving campus with lots of services and lots of other students. So we're happy about that, because we think that the student experience will be great. But yeah, this is, again, I don't mind personalizing this in terms of Seneca, but this is the story that's happening in post-secondary across Ontario and across Canada, is that we are going to have fewer students. That is a challenge. You've seen this. Some institutions have already started to suspend programs. If you suspend programs, you don't need as many teachers. If your population is dropping, you're not putting as much money into the local economy, all those kinds of impacts.
There will be those who will say, and some of them may be in the provincial government, we're just right-sizing a system that was too big. It's not a bad thing, they will argue, if campuses close or if we actually lose a university or college or two along the way. What do you say to that?
That's an interesting perspective. I would argue that it's always a challenge to lose an institution or two. Politically, I would suspect that the provincial government wouldn't actually be in favor of that, because the ones that are going to go, they're going to be in smaller communities. It's not going to be in Toronto that happens.
It's going to be in Nipissing.
It's going to be in places where there's good advocates around the cabinet and caucus table, and I suspect that's going to be a very hard decision. Look, other provinces have gone down these routes. There's one college in Newfoundland, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. These are big amalgamations. Those conversations have happened from time to time, but there's just no political appetite for it. I think, have we grown too much? Well, we are the least well-funded provincial post-secondary education system in the country.
Have been for 40 years, I have to add.
Have been for a long time. We've been lucky because the international students want to come to Toronto, they want to come to Ontario, but they really want to come to the GTA, so we've been able to mask that underfunding. But now that that's challenged by what the federal government has done, and we don't have, just to be, again, very blunt, we don't necessarily have two governments that are working terribly well together on this issue. The federal government can say, immigration's ours, and we're not post-secondary. province can say post-secondary is immigration, but you know what? They're joined at the hip.
Well, let me follow up on that angle, because certainly when the Ford government first came in 2018, they announced with a great deal of fanfare, and they assumed it would be a very well-received policy idea, to say, we're going to cut tuition and freeze it, and you students who want to go to post-secondary, this is great news for you. Similarly, the federal government thought, we've got an immigration problem, we better do something about that, and they have done what they have done. Do you think it's possible that both levels of government didn't really appreciate the bigger picture here because they were so focused on the sort of more narrowly focused political problem they each had?
I mean, you've been around politics as long as I have. The short-termism is not helpful in something like education and immigration, because you build your, if I can put it in marketing terms, you build your brand over years, and you can lose it overnight, and that's what's happened to Canada. And it's because we've got this short-termism, which you could also say is a very political lens. And I will say, at the risk of attracting some criticism from some quarters, that at the same time that the government cut and froze tuition, it also took a fair amount of money out of the Ontario Student Aid program and changed some of the grants to loans. So it wasn't entirely a clear win for students in all cases. So but we're not connecting those dots, and really part of what I come away from our current perfect storm is, can we ever get to the point where we sit down, the provinces, the employers, the schools, and the communities, because the communities are very much affected by this. That's part of the story here, is that communities felt overwhelmed in some cases by the number of international students and the number of temporary foreign workers. Could we ever come together and really say, okay, so let's be intentional about this rather than reactive?
How does that happen? If that's what's needed, how does that happen?
Well, I think it takes some political leadership and courage.
You see that on the horizon?
I think we're in a challenging time because of the elections on both levels on the horizon.
Canada has, and I should ask you whether it still has, Canada has had an image out there that we are a fairly welcoming place to people who want to come from all over the world and study here and either take that learning that they've had here and go back home and spread the good word there, or stay here and make a life for themselves here. Do you think that brand is in danger because of what's going on right now?
I think it's more than in danger. I think it has been badly, badly bruised, if not broken. And I'm not, this is not hyperbole. We have recruiters who are reporting from Asia that education fairs aimed at Canadian institutions are being canceled because there's lack of interest. Now, one major market for us, of course, has been India for the country, partly because of what's happening with Canada-India relations, but partly also because of what IRCC has announced. Very, very bad press about Canada. I mean, we have to, until very recently, there was actually a marketing campaign from the federal government, not from institutions, from the federal government, saying, study, explore, work, stay. I mean, very explicit. Come here to study, get your 3-year postgraduate work permit, earn your points toward permanent residency, and, Bob's your uncle, you'll become part of the Canadian. Somehow we're getting a different message out there. And whether it's the intended message or not, that's the way. And don't forget, other countries, unlike Canada apparently, has a very explicit strategy of being an international education hub, and surprising countries. Germany, Finland, South Korea wants to be an international hub. China wants to be a receiving country, not a sending country. Malaysia, Singapore, all these places, India's just now opened up to having international campuses open up. So everybody, this is a millions of students will be traveling and studying elsewhere. We are shutting ourselves out of that market if we don't smarten up.
Never mind our brand. What about the loss of money? Do you have a guess at how much money we're losing by not being as welcoming as we once were?
We'll see where it ends up. We've seen a big, big hit across, again, these are public figures now and reported in the media. Upwards of 40, 50% drop in September enrollments. Some of this is, if people are here for 2 years, they're still here for the second year. So the real cliff is going to come next year if we don't sort of get our house in order.
Let's take a look at the province for a second. I think it's fair to say that when you and I went to university a few years ago, the province of Ontario had the biggest chunk of subsidy of our tuition.
Yes.
What is it today?
Well, last fiscal year for us, the share of our revenues that came from the provincial government was 16.7%.
16.7.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, of course, because we had a huge chunk of international tuition. I mean, that's the truth. But that was what is helping cross-subsidize our domestic programs, and that's when you saw there was an institution that suspended 29 programs, and very explicitly they said the problem is that not just we're losing the international students, we're losing the cross-subsidy from international students for these programs. So even students, even these programs with mostly domestic students, were relying on that flow of money.
But again, back in our day, the province when the province told you to do something, you did it, and the explanation was because he who pays the piper calls the tune. They're not paying the piper anymore. Why do they still get to call the tune?
Well, they're the government. We're not. We're also, the college system, or as I would say now, the polytechnic and college system, we're Crown agencies. Universities have separate acts. We actually are Crown agencies. So that's a pretty direct line to government policy.
Do you have any idea how much money Seneca has foregone because of the tuition freeze over the past 6.5 years?
Oh, I don't know that number. It would be millions and millions of dollars.
Millions
of
dollars.
Yeah, I mean, we were getting sort of permission to raise tuition by about 3% a year. So, in percentage terms, I know that the amount of the operating grant until we got 3% this year and 2% but that's after 15 years freeze. The loss in terms of cost of living on that money was about 35%.
So what can't you do now that you kind of had hoped to do on the assumption that those millions were going to be in your coffer and you could spend them?
Well, we postponed a major capital project to preserve our cash. We have looked at several other smaller capital projects that we're going to put on hold or slow down. We're slowing down some of our initiatives because we can't afford to put the resources against them. And ultimately, we have to look at, frankly, everyone does in this, if things don't change, we're going to have to look at new ways of doing business and new business models. We'll be looking as hard as we can for things like contract training. Again, we have to go back 18 years. We're not making any more, students right now. We know what those demographics dictate, and frankly, it's Hunger Games trying to recruit those domestic students to our campuses. Again, we used to have the Relief Valve International. That's not going to happen. So, we're not going to start making cars. We have to think about what we do with the intellectual property that we have, our curriculum and so on. And obviously what we can do is teach, and what we can do is look for new markets for our teaching abilities and our curriculum.
Can you have as many teachers, professors, instructors as you used to have? If you guys haven't got the money coming in, do I assume you have to fire instructors and professors to keep up?
I mean, there's a direct correlation between the number of students you have and the number of staff that you have. There's just no question about that. So if the number of students continues to fall because we're losing international students, there's obviously going to be an impact on employment.
Here's one of my, get comfortable. I got a big setup here on this question. I met the new Minister of Colleges and Universities at an event that we were both at in Cornwall. I guess it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And he was a very pleasant guy, very charming guy. I'm not sure he's 40 years old yet. He's a very young guy. He approached me and he said, I'd love to be on your show and tell everybody about all the great things we're doing on colleges and universities. And I said, terrific. I'll email your office and we'll make that happen. I emailed his office. I was hoping he'd come on with you here today, actually. I got an email back from his office saying the minister is unavailable. I said, well, can we find another time where the minister might be available? And I believe the kids say, I got ghosted. That was the end of that. That was the end of the conversation. To be clear, I don't have any doubt that he wanted to come on. I think probably what happened was somebody in the Premier's office said, this is not our thing, this is not our brand, we don't want our people out there talking about this stuff. And so, sorry, but it's not on. You're finding yourself in the same situation. How do we hold these decision makers to account on decisions which you've clearly put through your lens and concluded they're ultimately hurting the system?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're in a time when we tend to be more reactive than anticipatory. So, I would sort of watch this space. I think over the next few months/year, you are going to see a number of very troubling announcements out of post-secondary institutions. And I think it'll have to be, sadly, it'll have to be that kind of mounting pressure.
Troubling meaning what?
Well, troubling meaning people have to suspend programs. People like us have to temporarily close campuses. People will have to move into layoffs. You've probably seen the numbers from the universities. They've been very public about it. They are, a number of big leading universities in Ontario are projecting very big leading deficits this year. And so you can only run on those for so long. You dip into your cash reserves. Some of us have been saving for a rainy day, and the tsunami has arrived. So, but that only lasts for so long. Again, you have to look at your fundamental cost base, and you have to make adjustments. And at some point, you have to make the decision, can we continue to do this? And I'm not saying at all that Seneca is in that situation. But there are, many smaller institutions that are going to be very challenged over the next year.
We don't have to name names, but we should put numbers on the table here. There are 24 colleges, 23 universities.
Yes.
How many do you think are in trouble?
Well, I mean, the COU, the Council of Ontario Universities, was reporting before we realized how bad the damage was to the Canadian brand that more than half of the universities are going to be in deficit this year. I suspect at least half of the colleges will be in deficit this year. The ones that aren't are because, again, those returning international students, but they have a limited, time left with us. And as soon as they leave, and if you can't replace them, then you fall off the fiscal cliff.
I have one question left, and that is, how do I put this? Okay, Premier Doug Ford famously went to, I think it was Humber, for, I think, less than a year and then dropped out. The post-secondary experience is not for everyone, and Mr. Ford, I guess at the time, decided that it wasn't for him. And he's done very well without a post-secondary education, right? He's a successful businessman. He's now the premier of the province, the second best job in politics in the country. Do you think that personal experience for him in the post-secondary world has led him to become inordinately antagonistic to your sector?
Well, I have no idea. I'm not in the Premier's head. B, I don't find him antagonistic towards the sector at all. I mean, we've got some good things out of the Ford government. I mean, we were allowed to offer our own nursing degrees as opposed to having to be in a collaboration with universities. We have now 3-year degrees, which ironically, we're going to be very, very popular in the international market to bring students here for a couple of years. We, in the college/polytechnic sector, can now do master's degrees. And we have our very first master's. We have our application coming in for a master's in artificial intelligence. So in some ways, we've got some really good things going. But financially, this is something that you can't escape. And at some point, I mean, the chickens are here. They've roosted, and we are going to have to deal with the consequences very, very soon. That's the conversation that we need to have.
David Agnew, we thank you for having some of that conversation here on TVO Tonight. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much. Great to see you.
It is not too often that we talk about the Republic of Serbia on this program, but then again, it's not too often that Serbian cabinet ministers visit Ontario. But that is happening now. In fact, Yelena Begovic is the first ever Serbian Minister of Science to visit Ontario. So we thought we'd invite her here to find out why the interest. And Yelena Begovic joins us now here in studio. Dobro večer.
Dobro večer. Good evening, everyone.
Kako si? Let's start with your background. Unlike many cabinet ministers, in fact, unlike many science ministers, you actually have a background in science, yes? You're a molecular biologist?
Yes, I've been in science for more than 24 years, and research was my first love and still is. I ended up in genetical engineering, although, as I mentioned previously, I wanted to be an archaeologist because the research and the process of research was fascinating for me. But nevertheless, genetical engineering turned out to be really the future.
You are a former student of the University of British Columbia, so you are not new to Canada, right? Why did you go there?
Well, my family moved to Canada. I moved with my mom and sister during the 90s. And my mom picked up the Vancouver. I think she fell in love with nature and the sea. So she was born in Dubrovnik, so she was quite attached to seaside. And we ended up in Vancouver. I studied oceanography at the UBC. It was quite a beautiful experience. Later on, I returned to Serbia, went for the molecular genetics, genetical engineering, and then I ended up as a Minister of Science.
Well, that's my next question. Why would you leave that wonderful world of intellectual brilliance and research to go into politics?
Well, one thing led to another. I was working in the lab as a typical researcher, totally in love with my work and with my ideas. Later on, I became group leader, then the deputy director, then the director. So there was more managerial work for me, less science. Nevertheless, I stick to the field of collaboration between academia and industry. That was fascinating me, and I wanted to develop a more efficient system in Serbia for this collaboration. And after that, I was for 9 years the director of that institute. I got a chance to change things maybe on a higher level, and I already had a lot of ideas. What should I do? So this was a good opportunity for me as a scientist coming from the basic level to the highest level, and I knew the system and I knew what should be done in order to really upgrade our scientific and innovation system.
And to do that, you had to get into politics.
Well, absolutely.
That's where it happens.
Yeah.
In which case, what brings you to us?
Well, the idea is somehow to make tighter connection with the startup ecosystem, but also scientific ecosystem of Canada. In Serbia, we have quite good science, and we do have collaboration, high level of international collaboration, but I want to make it more formal. So I chose several countries that I think that can be quite good opportunity for our scientists, but also for our startup ecosystem to connect with and to upgrade. And we can learn from Canada after a couple of days spent here in Canada. I know that we can learn, we can connect, and we can make a connection for the well of both sides.
In fact, you've signed some memorandums of understanding while you've been here. What will those do?
No.
Not quite?
Not quite, but we are preparing. We are opening this possibility for both scientific collaboration, but also for the collaboration of startup ecosystem. I mean, Canada has amazing startup ecosystem. We are a much smaller country. Nevertheless, we are, I would say, a country of creation. We perceive ourselves like that. So small market, but we can be a center of creation. And a lot of our startup companies are quite ambitious. So they see themselves on a global market. Particularly, they see the market of United States as something promising, but I see the Canada as a good first step forward towards North American market. And I see that we share very often same cultural values, similar ecosystems, startup and innovative ecosystem, economical systems. And I think this is a good first landing for our companies, and we were discussing about this.
That's interesting because much of what I hear about our venture capital system is that it is notoriously risk averse and far too dependent on the United States at the expense of the rest of the world. So are you sure you want to do business with us?
Well, you know, it's not about me. It's about people who are brave enough to start this endeavor of establishing the startup company based on some creative or even crazy idea, which always bears some type of risk, and they want to be among the best. So you have to strive for the best, although it is risky, but we don't want to close the doors for them. We really want to open them the global market and let them compete in this arena.
I have learned that you are about to assume, you meaning Serbia, the chairmanship of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence next year. What is the significance of that partnership?
Well, actually, we are starting to take technological developments very serious as a country. So one of the technologies, although they are not new, they somehow became a buzzword, artificial intelligence, but they're with us for past 20 years. Now they are developing quite fast and really starting to influence everyday life. So we have decided to be more active, not only internally, but on the international level. So we became members of GPAI, Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence, with, let's say, 29 most developed countries. And we got the opportunity, and I'm really proud of it, to be co-chairs this year, and next year we will chair. So this gives us opportunity really to be a part of, let's say, decision makers to see how to really provide safe and secure technological development of this artificial intelligence, but also to speak about ethical concerns, policy concerns, and directions of the development of this quite powerful, I would say, technology. So this puts Serbia in a center of, let's say, decision making.
Let me follow up on that, because I wonder what your most profound concerns are about what artificial intelligence is doing to our lives.
It's kind of complicated question. I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence, although I am following particular application of this technology in agriculture, in science, in medical sciences. So it's a powerful tool. For me, it's a powerful tool. It can be huge help for our experts, so they may focus on some other activities, including maybe more research. Since I am following what is happening and the concerns of people who created different algorithms for machine learning, there is a kind of a concern that we're not aware what is really happening in those black boxes of the algorithm process and what can turn out from that. So there is a concern by the experts. I'm following that, but I cannot, make a final decision whether this is going to be good or not. But I do see this as a huge potential and a tool, particularly in the area where we are really producing huge amounts of data and we cannot process them by our natural brains. So we do need artificial brains, and I see artificial intelligence potential in that field. Every technology can be used or misused, unfortunately. So it's up to us. Unfortunately, when we speak about the new technologies, usually we are always lagging behind with ethics and with policies and with legal framework. So this is happening also with AI. But I think the Global Partnership for AI, for instance, and similar organizations should speak about this, should, follow faster the technology.
Let's talk a little bit about Serbia's place in the world today. And I'm going to be a bit of an old fogey here, because I well remember when I was 7 years old, Canada hosted Expo 67. And it was a big deal. As many people in the country as could went to it, and it was fabulous. In a few years, Serbia is going to host the world at the World's Fair. What does that say about Serbia's place in the world today?
Well, I see Serbia today and in the future as a country of good science, innovation, and creativity. So I'm really trying to present some amazing things that are happening in Serbia, different projects, including Expo 2027. So we will be hosts of Expo in 2027, and I hope really that we will be able to bring the whole world in Serbia. This will be good for Serbia, but also it will be good for the whole region. We didn't have Expo in Balkans. This is the first Expo after 30 years in Southern Eastern Europe. So it's a good chance that world see this part of the world with maybe different eyes. The theme is play for humanity. Play as a concept, not like when you're only as a child, but play as a source of creativity, whether it's in arts, whether it's in science, whether it's in innovation. And sports and music for all, I think we all can speak. Every single country in the world can speak and give something when it comes to music and sport. We all love it. There are no borders when it comes to sports and music. But one of the major pillars will be also innovations. So we are preparing our scientific community, startup community, innovative community to really present Serbia as a place of innovation and creativity. So great honor, and I would say great success, because the race was really extremely competitive.
Who did you beat?
Well, United States.
Well, you beat Minnesota, right? They were going to
yes,
host it. Yeah.
Yes, and Spain and Thailand and Argentina. So it was really tough. But we made it. We were really focused. A huge amount of energies were, given for this task, and we succeeded at the end.
I was telling you at the beginning of our conversation that the last time I was in Serbia was 30 years plus ago, and obviously it was to do a documentary on the war that was consuming that part of Europe in shocking fashion. I wonder if you, and I guess I have to say as well, for a lot of people, that will be that's what comes to mind first when they think about the Balkans. Can you tell us how you think Serbia today is different from the Serbia we heard so much about 30 years ago?
Well, first of all, you have to come to Serbia and to see for yourself, right? After 30 years, it would be great.
It's time.
For you to come. Every country during its history, most of the countries had at certain momentum some type of war. Nevertheless, we all evolve, we all develop. Nowadays, the number of cranes in Belgrade, but also in other parts of the Serbia is amazing. That's a good sign that we are building. We're building something new. We're building quite modern Serbia. Innovations and creativity is in central place now for us, and we do see the future where young, innovative, smart people have the central place in the development, not only economy, but also the development of our society. Expo 2027 will be a great opportunity, so I'm inviting everyone to visit Serbia, a country of beautiful nature, amazing people, good food, but also a place of creative and smart people. It
was obviously the case 30 years ago that Serbs and Croats and Bosnians and et cetera, could not get along anymore. And as a result, they had a civil war. What about today? Are these different people from different countries able to get along better and solve problems in a more regional way? Well, things are evolving in a better manner, I have to say. It's good to come during the celebration of New Year's to Belgrade, for instance, or to Novi Sad. You will see everyone from the region there. So it's a sign of our politics. It's a sign of our vision for the whole region. So we have to collaborate. From the scientific point of view, we are now building, we have a big project, scientific project that we see as a center of gravity of the region, but also broader region. So we do see ourselves as leaders in the region when it comes to science, when it comes to technology, when it comes to economical development, and the point of gravity of everyone. I asked the question because I do remember, again, 30 years ago, talking to people in Belgrade and around Serbia, and they were still talking to me about the events of 1389 and a battle lost to the Ottoman Turks 600 years ago, and the humiliation they still felt because of it. I mean, that doesn't go away 30 years later, right? That is still there. How do you deal with that? Well, actually, I mean, every country and every nation has its own history and has certain points that are quite important
even after 500 years, for some after 1,000 or 2,000 years. And it keeps going through the family, through the culture, and it's a part of cultural heritage, I would say. People are now, of course, living in 21st century. We are all becoming more oriented towards the future, because future is coming. The past is something behind us. So we are really trying very hard to make a perception of ourselves in next 5 years, in 10 years. That is my personal philosophy also. Let's build a better future.
Well, let's talk about that. If you and I were to sit down here 5 years from now and discuss how different the Serbian-Canadian relationship is, how would it look different 5 years from now if you are successful?
Well, I hope that we will have much stronger ties, not only in science, but my now primarily focus is a startup ecosystem. So I hope to see some Canadian companies coming to Serbia, because we're open for a market of almost 3 billion people. So this is a good opportunity, but also for our startup ecosystem to come through Canada, maybe to a larger market. And I can tell that it can work.
You got into politics, you told us earlier, because you felt you needed to be at the tables where decisions were being made.
Yes.
Even though you're not a professional politician, right? You are a scientist who is sort of on loan to politics. What have you found about what's possible in Serbian politics to achieve versus what you can't do because you're not a pro?
I don't know, one has to be a politician to make a good decision, to have a good vision. So I ended up in politics with quite clear ideas. What do I want to accomplish? And how do I see the potential of science for the benefit of the citizens, for the benefit of the whole country? And I think more scientists should be involved in politics. It's a completely different world compared to your, laboratory, where you are by yourself and your idea. Now you have to fight for your ideas. But the possibility that you can change things, that you can leave something for the next generations, really gives you the strength to survive in politics. And I think it's everywhere more or less the same. I do think that we need more experts, more knowledgeable people getting involved in politics. I do know that people are reluctant to do that. It's not easy.
Well, for sure. And I'll give you the example of here in Canada. I mean, your experience in politics so far has been pretty good?
Absolutely. I would do it again.
Okay. Well, we had a Minister of Science in the current Liberal government who was a Nobel Prize winner, Kirsty Duncan, and she got dropped from cabinet. She's got a book out right now, and I guess I should call her up and try and get her on this program, but I think she would tell you that her experience with politics was very mixed, and that would be putting it mildly. Do you worry about what politics is going to do to you and your ability to get things done?
Well, first of all, I'm not such a young person, so I do have a
You're not
very
such an old person
strong,
either.
But I have a, very long career behind me, so I know what I want and what I don't want in my life. I do have a really strong support from the rest of the government on some quite important projects, like building up the innovation system, like building up the Bio4 campus, the first campus of that type in a broader region, which I see as an amazing opportunity for our development, but also opportunity for us to connect with the rest of the world. So we become kind of a center for biotech and artificial intelligence, putting together academia, private sector, startup ecosystem on a small, dense place. So they have to collaborate together and work together. And this gives me the strength to partially act as a politician. So I'm trying to keep the balance. I hope it's possible to keep the balance because, I won't be in politics forever. This is just a part and a stage in my career development, but I do want to contribute, and I think I have the obligation if I have the idea and the strength really to try to change it. Whether I will succeed or not, we'll see in the future. But I would regret if I didn't try.
Let me talk to you as the scientist then, as opposed to the politician. We know during the COVID epidemic that as much as you love science and as much as you trust science's ability to do good for humanity, there are many people in the world today who have a lot less trust in science because of their experience with COVID. How concerned are you about that?
Well, actually, my personal experience that science did amazing thing during COVID. We proved that the vaccine could be developed in like 6 to 8 months instead of like 20 years. So it can be done. So if we got stuck in a similar situation, I have much more confidence that we do have tools and arms to fight the epidemic, new epidemic event. In our country, scientists were involved. They were volunteers working on building the testing labs, testing people for COVID, bringing news, information, valid information, so people are not being confused what is happening. So in Serbia, people still trust scientists. And I think on a global level, also scientists were quite involved in helping countries and helping citizens to get over this crisis. So I wouldn't say that people are not believing science. I think most of the people still do trust science.
Minister, as much as or at least I should say, as much as I've enjoyed this conversation, we have to bring it to a close, but not before I ask one last question. Given your ability to speak wonderful English and French, and given the time you have spent in Canada at University of British Columbia, I want to ask you, who loves Canada more? You or Novak Djokovic, who has won 4 Canadian Open tennis titles?
That's a tricky question, I have to admit, but I still have family who lives in Canada, so I am attached emotionally, definitely to Canada. But also Djokovic plays the best tennis in the world. So I'm really happy to be here again. And I hope that I will come back to Canada soon and that we will sign MOUs and that we will connect our two countries more strong in the field of science and entrepreneurship.
Have you ever played tennis against Djokovic?
Oh, no, I wouldn't dare. I don't think so. But I played the tennis most of my life. So
could you beat him?
Oh, I don't think that there is a single person still that can really beat him a couple of times in a row. So
he's pretty good.
Oh, he is amazing.
That is the Republic of Serbia's Minister of Science, Yelena Begovic, who has been our guest here. And we want to say, if I can remember how to say this, hvala lepo, doviđenja.
Merci and thank you.
Social media, not surprisingly, is like a huge component to kind of any type of body image.
You see hundreds, maybe even thousands of faces and bodies that are really unrealistic on any given day.
My name is Kyle Gensen. My research and my academic career focuses on understanding eating disorders, body image, muscle dysmorphia, substance use behaviors, particularly among young people and young boys and men.
My name is Victoria Gracie. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Toronto, and I'm with a laboratory at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, as well as Temerty Faculty of Medicine, where we study body image disorders, such as body dysmorphic disorder. I'm also a fashion model, and I write a lot about my experience with body dysmorphic disorder. I don't exactly like how I have my face positioned in this one here. I feel like my chin looks a little bit off at the side. It's kind of funky.
In order to be diagnosed with body dysmorphic disorder, muscle dysmorphia, you'd have to be diagnosed by like a general practitioner or a medical doctor or psychiatrist. In Ontario, those would be the main people who would provide that diagnosis. We've started to sort of look at muscle dysmorphia, particular males who use social media at higher levels, so are on there more time during the day, for example, have greater symptoms of muscle dysmorphia. A lot of young people are looking at exercise videos or actually using social media as a mechanism to understand and learn how to gain muscle and what type of exercises to use and what type of dietary practices to use. So it's actually a huge information source for a lot of young males as they're trying to increase their muscle mass. The difference between body dysmorphia and muscle dysmorphia is very little, actually. If someone has a diagnosis of body dysmorphia, they might be specified to have muscle dysmorphia because their preoccupation is around muscularity versus a different type of preoccupation like one's hair or one's facial features or other parts of their body that they might have some obsessive kind of compulsive thoughts around.
I was told that I was too big to be a ballet dancer. Now, interestingly enough, I was also told that everything was wrong with my body aside from my waist. And in spite of that, my primary concern was my waist. I feel like my waist kind of looks bigger at the side, particularly my lower waist. Sometimes bugs me a bit.
In order to help people who have body dysmorphic disorder or muscle dysmorphia or any type of condition, certainly I always recommend this idea of respectful curiosity. Joining with them in the process, really aligning with them and trying to understand what's going on for them in their minds, how they're feeling about themselves.
I try not to go too much into it.
And so much of body dysmorphic disorder, muscle dysmorphia is so much related to one's body. And so there's a lot of, I think, shame around that. There's a lot of stigma around how bodies are presented, a lot of expectations around, from society about how bodies should look. And so I think people often feel very shamed about, the preoccupation they might have about certain flaws.
Yeah.
Does this cause shame in you?
A little bit. So when I was around 13 years old, and I was told I was too big to be a ballet dancer, and I would say I started thinking about my body through being in the ballet industry. It wasn't before then that I really thought much about my body. I was a kid, I was living life, but by being in an industry that's very artistic, that's very dependent on having a certain look, and that look being put upon very young women, and parents with the best intentions putting their kids in that thinking this is a great activity, but in reality behind closed doors, there's this pressure that occurs that many people don't know about. And for me, that was the start of it, right? So that's not to say that everybody in ballet or in, say, an industry that has these ideals is going to face BDD specifically. Negative body image, that's quite likely, but not necessarily BDD.
So muscle dysmorphia falls underneath body dysmorphic disorder, and there's lots of debate kind of in the field about whether it should be classified as a sort of specifier of body dysmorphic disorder, which, to get technical, falls underneath the obsessive compulsive disorders in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
The DSM is a diagnostic manual that people like clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists use when diagnosing people. It gives a list of all the symptoms, and it's supposed to really outline every psychiatric disorder that we know of.
People with muscle dysmorphia often see themselves as much smaller than you or I might see them. We might see them as like, wow, that person is quite large or quite strong or quite cut or lean, but they see themselves in the mirror as being insufficiently muscular.
So body image ideals have existed long before we have even existed. Before us, there was Venus figurines, which are basically stone-cut figures that Neanderthals sometimes would actually make, as well as early humans, and they were meant to represent a female figure, and it was a very full-formed woman, and she was considered the ideal of that time. When we're looking at, say, advertising, so more similar to, say, social media, the rise of the ideal woman really came in with the Gibson girls, and that was around the late 1800s. They were corseted, they had these tiny, tiny waists, they had perfect skin, glowing complexion, curled hair up in these pompadours, looking perfect, pristine, always playing sports, too. They loved golf and tennis, and they would have several children on top of living this amazing lifestyle. And that really became the model. And from there we used, say, models. It's really when brands try to create an image next to impossible for people to attain. And that's to encourage the consumer to buy into their products, hoping that they'll look like that ideal, which is really impossible to look like. And it puts people in this endless loop of trying to obtain that ideal look.
With muscle dysmorphia, we kind of idealize a muscular body, especially for males. Like, that is the male muscular ideal. It represents a strong masculine man. It's seen in the gym and a lot of our spaces as like very powerful and very important. That differentiation of when is it problematic and when is it not is really murky. Like, is that person abusing steroids? Well, okay, that could be dangerous. But if they're working out 5 or 6 days a week, they're changing their eating habits, they are really obsessed with wanting to get more muscular, they're still going to school and participating in social activities, is that problematic? I don't know. I think teasing out that piece is really hard, and I think we're still trying to do that.
Social media has really wired us to think that, we put a lot of value into the like count, the comment count, what people are saying about us out there. And, it's a trap with social media in general for people with PDD and for people without PDD. And it really gets us thinking about our supposed self-worth in the context of our physical appearance many times when it comes to those selfies and those photos. And I can't tell you what the impacts of that are. I don't know. Nobody knows.
There's a definite need for more understanding of the treatment of body dysmorphic disorder, muscle dysmorphia. Unfortunately, there's not a plethora of clinicians that are experts in this field or know how to treat it in an effective way. And so that is a kind of also additional barrier that I think we have to understand and kind of get over. And that also just kind of emphasizes the need for just a supportive environment for that person, from family, from partners, from friends, and their social environment.
That is the agenda for Monday, October 28th, 2024. What effect does corporate consolidation have on the average consumer? We'll find out tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.